In this screencast, I'm going to discuss while loops. This is a different way to introduce control flow in your program. It's an alternative to the for loop. So let's start with an example problem. Suppose we want to ask a user, let's say a participant in some experiment that you're running, for a name. Now, we usually don't ask subjects for their name, we ask for ID numbers, but let's pretend we're asking for their, let's say, first or last name. So we can set up some code where we clear the screen, and then we try to generate a variable string based on asking the input, please enter your name, to the user. And I'm using the syntax here where I'm forcing the input to generate a string. Now the result is this input, this user query, is then passed to the variables str, and then I'm printing this to the screen. So if I run this program, please enter your name, I say Mark, and then name is assigned to the string Mark. But now let's suppose I run this program again and I don't enter my name. So in this case, name will be empty. There are no characters in the string. Now, suppose I want to catch this condition. So I would like to know when a user or participant has not entered their name. So I can set up a if statement to test if the length of the string equals 0, so there are no characters in the string. And then I can print something to the screen like no name was provided, and otherwise I print a name. So if I run this program and now I enter my name and I actually hit the enter key, now this statement is executed, no name was provided. Now ideally, I would like to force the user to provide some string that's not empty, that has some characters, so provide a valid name. So how do I set up code to do this? So let me show you how I can edit this program and then convert this program using the while loop to do this. So I'm going to comment out this code. So this is my old code. I just hit the Control R combination keys. So Control key plus simultaneously the R key. So now these are just comments, and the program will no longer execute these lines. And I'm going to enter some new code. So I'm going to say, well, let's start by assuming that string has no characters, so it's an empty string, that this represents the name. And now I set up this while loop. While the length of string equals 0, then execute some statements. And what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to ask the user, so I'm copying this line over here. I'm going to ask the user to provide their name, and that name will be assigned to string. And I will keep asking for their name until the length of the string is no longer 0. In that case, I've satisfied the termination condition of this loop, and I'll exit this loop. So let's see if this program works. So please enter your name, and I'll actually hit the enter key. So now it asks me again, please enter your name, and I say Mark. And now I exit this condition. So we can actually debug this program to see if it works as intended. So I start by assigning str, which contains the name, to an empty string. I'm testing if the length of the string equals 0. Well, it is, so I'm entering this while loop. I'm executing then this statement. And now I have to be careful because now the control of this program is relegated to the command window, right? Because it's asking the user to type in something. Now let's say if I now type in nothing, I go to the next line, end, and I go back to this statement because the length of the string still equals 0. So, and I'm continuing to ask for a username until I satisfied this condition. Now, the while loop is actually very similar to a for loop. It's just an alternative to loop over a set of statements until some condition is met. So here is an example of a while loop where I start with the value for I equal to 0, and then I'm executing these statements while I has a value smaller than 10. And what are these statements? Well, I'm incrementing I by 1 each time I go enter here, and then I'm printing the value of I to the screen. So if I run these statements here, so I'm setting a breakpoint here so that the execution stops over here. So I'm just evaluating these lines. You can see this is a very simple loop where the values of I from 1 to 10 are printed to the screen. Now we could have done the same thing by using a for loop, right? This is our familiar for loop where I'm saying for I equals the value 1 all the way to 10, and I'm printing the value of I to the screen. So these two loops are identical. Sometimes the for syntax is easier to use. Sometimes the while syntax is easier to use, especially when you have multiple conditions that you want to test for termination. For example, you could combine different variables. You could say, well, while I is smaller than 10 and j equals 0, then do this. So let me actually remove this code over here. And now I run this. Okay, so I will never enter these statements. So let me set it up like this. So while I equals smaller than 10 and j equals the value of 1, then I do these statements over here. So again, you can use logical expressions to test if some combination of conditions is met. Now you have to be a little careful with while loops because it's possible that your while loop will never terminate. So suppose I change this example, and for whatever reason I'm saying that this while loop continues while the value j equals 1. So if I run this program, now note that this is not terminating. I keep executing these statements. And if this happens in your program, you can use the Control-C key combination on your keyboard. So holding down the Control key as well as the C key simultaneously to terminate the execution of a program. So when I hit these keys, it said operation terminated by user. So you have to be careful setting up conditions that will actually terminate. Otherwise, you have this never-ending loop. Now, the normal way to exit a while loop is if this condition after the while statement is not met. But there is a different way to get out of a while loop by using the break command. So I can add a little statement here. So if I equals the value 10, then break. And this syntax means that when I execute this statement break, it will actually break out of the current loop that's being executed. So in this case, it's a while loop, but you can also break out of a for loop. So if I clear the screen and run this code, now you see that even though this condition is always true, so I'm never breaking out of the while loop by violating this condition, over here at some point I reaches the value 10, and when that's true I'm executing the statement break, and that causes me to break out of this particular while loop.